welcome Rob Leland to Home is Where the Dark Is. How you doing, Rob?
I'm good, brother. How are you?
Can't complain. It's a Friday afternoon. Just took care of all of my errands today and got the studio set up a little bit differently. Got a
Yeah.
new AC and heater units in the studio, so that's been fantastic. Though I did have like 3 months of downtime, which was a pain in the ass. But yeah, everything's good over here, man. How about you? What's going on?
Man, I'm telling you, this has been the weirdest day. I was actually over at the University of Washington earlier this morning, and as I was driving home, I decided to buy my family this really cool pizza that you can only find at this one place over in West Seattle. And I ran over there, grabbed the pizza, and I was driving home. I decided to take a scenic route, and when I did, the front axle of my car came off.
Oh no.
Yeah, so I am without a vehicle until I don't know until I buy a new one. So it's kind of weird, but I'm in a good mood, so it's all good.
Oh man, sorry to hear that. Car issues always are a pain in the ass, but hopefully you have your insurance will take care of that for you.
Yeah, that and well, it's really down to the fact that I'm not a mechanic, and so I find that these are typically really stressful events. But this one doesn't seem to be getting under my skin, so I'm good, and I'm really happy to be talking to you, man. I really admire you.
Oh, I'm glad to have you on, man. It's good to talk to you. And I've been watching your progress with your podcast, and yeah, just let me know how is that going? How's it been lately? What are the challenges you've faced with that, and just what's the status on that right now?
Well, it's interesting that you mention progress because there's this feeling I think artists have in general, and I'm certainly guilty of the feeling that myself, which is this idea of being an imposter, that I don't really belong in the space because maybe I'm not as talented as other individuals. But it's been a challenge. I've been doing it for a number of years. I made a couple of changes to the show over the years. And every time I did, I thought they were for the better and they were always losing me listeners. So about a year ago, I really decided to sort of just jump in and own it for what it was. And I guess what I mean by that is that I stopped looking to try to impress everyone, that I stopped looking to try to be a famous or successful or celebrity of any kind in this business, and to just talk to bands and musicians and producers like yourself who I found genuinely interesting, and I thought they had something to say, and I thought somebody needed to hear their material. So, it moves along. It has certainly gained listenership over the years, and just this year, I mean, I've probably jumped up a good 50% in listenership, so that's been nice. And I think it's because I've just decided to focus on what I like the most, which is either heavy music or, industrial or dark themes. I'm a big fan of that kind of stuff.
Right on, man. Yeah, sounds good. I've been noticing. I did notice your change. You kind of did like a little like a rebrand, and your thumbnails are more streamlined and more consistent now. So yeah, I've been noticing all that stuff. But when you said before, you made some changes, but then at first you saw a decrease in listeners. Like what were the changes you made?
Well, one was a production change, meaning on the back end, I switched hosts, and going from one host to another, I didn't know I had to do certain tricks in the back end, with the software. And I didn't understand forwarding. I mean, I'm a little older, right? I'm 58 years old, and I think I did this like 2 years ago. And I went from having a really nice, like 12,000 listeners, man. My little tiny show, I had a huge listenership for a little guy. And I switched whatever it's called, hosts. I went from Libsyn to Spreaker, and I didn't understand how to do it correctly. And I ended up blowing up my subscription base. And
Okay.
when I woke up on the other side, Alex, I had like 17 subscriptions. It was a terrifying shock, and I was so embarrassed by it, I didn't tell anybody about it, which basically made it permanent.
Huh.
I just, yeah, I was an idiot, and so I've been slowly clawing my way back.
So is that what's the host you're using now again?
I'm using Spreaker,
Okay. So
and
is that
I chose Spreaker. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
oh no, is that like the digital distribution that uploads your podcast to all the different services? Is that what that is?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I chose that one because at the time they seemed to be the one that was sort of the most user friendly. And they had access to a lot of the sites that once you upload it, it gets dispersed to all the variables, and it just seemed to be more appealing to me cost wise. Everything about it I liked. It was very streamlined, but live and learn life.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not familiar with, like, I forgot the name of the company, but at some point I looked into a service to get, just the audio of my podcast up on Apple Podcasts and all that stuff. I forgot the name of the company that did it, but I ended up deciding not to do it and just doing it all on YouTube just to help, to hopefully help with the subscribers on that. So it's just like the podcast is only in one place, but I know a lot of podcast listeners, they listen to it in their car and they just want the audio. So I'm probably doing myself a disservice by not having it on Apple Podcasts. But for now, it's just what I'm going with, and I'm just trying to just do the YouTube thing for now because it's the video. I put the most effort I can into the video, so I just want people to check it out on YouTube. But yeah, okay, so then after you got readjusted to the new format, and then your subscribers started to go up, what kind of changes did you like slowly make? Like I said before, I noticed you had some like graphic changes, some branding changes, but so how has it been to get back to where you were?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's really been a long and frustrating road. It's actually been gosh, I want to say about 5 years. It's really been quite some time, and it's been very slow, but they've stuck, and I think that's the difference. Before I had a lot of shifting in and out subscriptions. I don't really know why. I mean, heck, man, for all I know, it could have been bots back in 2017. I don't know, but I had a lot, and so now I feel like they're sticking. I'm getting a much more consistent listening, a listenership. The audience seems to be sticking with it, listening most of the way through, if not all of the way through. The distraction has been that I decided to do the opposite of what you're doing. I wanted to go towards the audio side. Excuse me. I wanted to go towards the video side, and what happened is in a way, I want to say my podcast suffered because I was so focused on trying to turn it into a vehicle that people could see, that they would be attached to, that their eyes would lock onto it on a short or whatever, and they would like it. And I stopped kind of paying attention to the audio side. Sure, it sounded good, but I wasn't editing as well because, I was trying to serve two masters now. And I actually think what you're doing is brilliant. I think it would be very simple to turn your show into an audio format as well, obviously. But I think video is really where it's at. And your video is a proof that, if you're thoughtful, you have a beautiful room and great lighting, and you have really intriguing guests, you'll build your brand a little more effectively. Mine has been a challenge because I've kind of upset the balance myself by changing the name of the show, and then having a new host, and then I mean, you know what I mean? I was just kind of lame with it. I don't think I ever really did it right, and now I'm finally doing it right. So ask me in 10 years.
Yeah, totally. Gotcha. Like I know it's just a constant, it's constant learning. It's a constant challenge to
battle.
try and to keep up with the the changing technology, the changing algorithm, the changing formats that we have to adapt to, and it's just constant work, and it is very, very challenging. But yeah, I think what you're doing now, as long as I think the most important thing is consistency, and I think that can be the hardest thing because we're human beings, and sometimes we get off of our schedule and our routines aren't always perfect. So then sometimes there's listeners that they're looking forward to episodes dropping at a certain time, or if you have like a routine or a pattern. I know like some podcasts, it's like every Tuesdays or every like twice a week or whatever. Every podcast has their way, but I think when we start to be inconsistent, that's when we kind of lose listeners because they're expecting something and then it doesn't show up. So they're like, oh, well, I can't rely on this show. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. No, it's so true. And yeah, I mean, you're hitting it right on the head. Consistency, showing up for your audience is everything. In the beginning, you're in a sense, you're telling them through, everything from audio to colors to your branding, to your fonts. You're telling them who you are and what you want them to see. And if
Right.
you keep switching it around, or if you don't show up with a new video or new show every, I don't know, 7 days, 10 days, 2 days, whatever your output is, people will fall off. You do have to remain consistent. And on top of that, the algorithms will reward you because now you're focused on serving the public. They're built that way.
Right. How do you have your routine set up or your scheduling? Do you have your podcast like twice a week or a certain day or once a week, or how do you have it set up right now?
Once a week on Tuesdays. This time of year, it's a little weird because the holidays do interfere with my output. Honestly, I probably use it as a bit of an excuse, so that's goofy. But all that being said, every Tuesday, it drops right at midnight. So when you wake up, it should be downloaded into your phone if you have it set up that way. I'm hyper consistent in that regard. Videos, when I do have them, which is probably 90% of the interviews I've done, the videos usually show up around 9 a.m. Pacific, because nobody's watching my videos at 2 in the morning, unless they're in, I don't know, Belgium or something like that, right? So it's good.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about your decision to start podcasting in general, because I know you said earlier, you told me that you're also a voice actor. So did that have something to do with it, or is it separate?
It's separate. Actually, the voice acting came because of the podcasting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, and I can tell that story if you really want to hear it.
Sure.
But in the beginning, I mean, probably the easiest way to say this, Alex, is I was a professional drummer, and that means I was a drummer making a living as well, a drummer, or I should say, at least trying to make a living. And that would be everything from playing drums on other people's records, doing my own stuff, top 40 bands I might help out. I did some production work, some arranging with different artists over the years, and I did a lot of sessions in studios in both Virginia Beach, of all places, and in the Seattle area. So those were my relationships. That's where they were based. And so I did a lot of work with bands in those areas. And in 2003, I retired from the music business. I had done 25 years and I was burned out. And honestly, I wanted to make a decent living because music is, as you know, music can be a very, very tough road to go down to expect to actually make a living with. And
Yes.
I did that until 2003. Then I actually got a regular job and ran an insurance company for about 12 years. Then I sold that and I decided, heck, for fun, I'm going to start doing podcasts. It can't be that hard. As you well know, that is such a lie we tell ourselves. And I can't even listen to the first 50 shows I did. I don't tell anybody about them. I don't want to hear them. They are an embarrassment. And yeah, you learn. But I thought I would be good at it, and because I'm an ex, whatever you want to call it, musician, I have a ton of well known, or at least well known to me, musicians that I thought had interesting stories. So that's actually why I started it. I thought maybe I'll be one of those guys like a Mark Maron that you know sort of hits a zeitgeist moment, and everybody falls in love with it. But that hasn't happened yet, and it may never. But that's okay.
Yeah. So about how old were you when you started drumming?
Drumming, I started playing when I was 4.
Wow.
I did my first recording when I was 12 years old, 1978.
And was it like rock and metal that you were into primarily, or did you do like all kinds of different genres? And when you say you're doing sessions and stuff, like what was your focus?
Most of it was rock, metal, and industrial.
Okay.
I've always loved synthetic music. Like I was the kid that would go to music stores and play with a Juno or a Jupiter, any synthesizer just to make sounds. I was the annoying kid at Guitar Center.
Yeah.
But yeah, my parents were very helpful in getting me going. I moved a lot when I was a kid, so music really was my saving grace. And I moved to one specific town, kind of in the middle of nowhere. So I sort of became this little local legend. I've always joked that if YouTube existed in 1978, it would have been famous. But uh, all that said, I played on a lot of different stuff. When I was a kid, I was really into prog rock. So, bands like Rush and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and, early Genesis and that sort of thing. Um, and honestly, probably because as a drummer, those songs had a lot of notes in them. There was a lot of drumming, right? Especially Rush as an example. So that was my thing as a player. And, when you do that enough, you build chops. And after a while, I started getting opportunities. And they really came about 1984, 1985, when I started college. And I was living in Portland at the time. And I started doing recordings down there. There used to be a studio. Can't remember the name of it for the life of me. I want to say it was Broadway, but I don't think so. But long story short, I did my first real big work down there, where I was playing with sort of local heavies, and I just kind of kept that going. But I did have a bit of a sidetrack too, because I also I like to sidetrack and ruin my life often, because I joined the United States Navy.
Okay. Wow.
And yeah, yeah. And I did that for a few years until I discovered that it was absolutely horrible. And so while I was in the middle of a submarine tour, for real, dude, I was on a submarine for 2 years from 87 to 89. I asked the commanding officer if I could, they call it cross rating, which is when you leave the particular thing you do and you do a new thing. And I asked if I could cross rate from submarines to the Navy band. And they were like, why? And I was like, well, because that's actually the only thing I do really well. And they let me audition at the Navy band in Charleston, South Carolina. And I did. And I had to sign an extension to my time in the service. And so I did 7.5 years in the Navy, 5 of which were in the Navy band. So that is part of my professional music experience.
And how was that experience like in the Navy band? Because like I haven't met anyone who's done that. So what is it? I mean, just give us a little rundown of what that's like.
Yeah. Well, it's actually surprising in a lot of ways. First and foremost, there are technically there are 5 services, right? There's the Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, and Coast Guard. And of those 3, the Army, Navy, and Marines all have the same. It's like a music school that you go to in Virginia, which is now why I was in Virginia. Um, and so anyway, long story short, you have to audition, and it's a rigorous, Alex. I mean, dude, It's a rigorous audition. You have to be able to sight read at a very high level. You have to have significant chops. They just don't let everybody in. You really have to do it. And it's because the Navy band has only, at the time, I think it's smaller now, but at the time they only had 800 musicians in the world. 800 in the world. And I was one of those. So you really had to be at a very high level. So now that I'm done self-congratulating, the job itself was, for the most part, humbling and frustrating because, when you're a creative person, your desire is to sort of do what you do at the level you do it at. And, when you're in the Navy band, you're limited because you have a sort of a pick of the litter, right? You do have the pick of the litter. You have these killer musicians, but you're limited because you have this tiny group. I was stationed in the city of Norfolk for a few years, and then here in the Seattle area, but right before I got out. And those 5 years, I had a relationship pool that was probably, I don't know, 60 people deep. So
Wow.
I didn't have a lot of choices. I'm an active member of the United States military. It's not like I could just go do what I wanted. I had to do what they said. I had to go where they went. And a lot of it is ceremonial music. Every once in a while, they would use rock bands for recruiting tools, and I was always a part of that, so that was fun. But, when you're forced to wear, they call them whites, when you're forced to look like an ice cream man on a stage in front of 5,000 people at the Portland Rose Festival, as cool as it is to play a festival and to play, I don't know, your best Pearl Jam cover, the
Hell
reality is it's
yeah.
a very humbling, not a very fun job. But, it allows you to be, dude, I practiced like 10 hours a day. I was just I was peak Rob, man, in 1994. So, for that, it's great. Everything else, it's very dissatisfying. Excuse me, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not satisfying.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it sounds like a time to be a time to really, be disciplined and practice a lot of drums. And I mean, that's a valuable time right there
For
with
sure.
your skills. But for the listeners and for myself, I'm just curious, like, what was it like transitioning out of music and making the decision to retire from music? Did you go through any kind of depression, or were you immediately just like on to the next thing, and you didn't reminisce and you didn't have any regrets, or like what was that transition like for you?
Yeah, boy, that's a really loaded question. But I'm happy to talk about it. Dude, it still remains probably the worst choice I ever made. Um, and look, I could give a million excuses about why I did what I did. The reality is actually a lot simpler. In 1999, I got married, and I hung in there for 4 more years. But the reality is I really wanted to be married. I wanted to be with this woman who I'm still with. I mean, we've been together 27 years now, and
Congrats, man.
I want. Yeah, thank you. And I just really wanted to be with her. I wanted to buy a house. I wanted to live in a small town outside of the city, and I did all those things. And that was great. But the missing it part, the looking back at it, the regrets, they're all huge. I think about it all the time, and I mean, heck, the other day when Primus, put the note out saying, "Hey, we'll listen to anybody," the first thing I thought of is I should just go sit down and audition. And I ran over to where my drums are. My drums are actually set up at a church about 10 miles from my house because I don't have anywhere at my home to set them up. And this church has been very nice. They've allowed me to have my drum set up over there. I mean, since 2010. And so, but I haven't been there in quite a while. In fact, I will actually out myself. I have not played my drums in 18 months. That is true.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't even know how it happened outside of, I can blame COVID or something. But it's just life, I got older. I'm 58. I'm tired. I just don't want to work that hard anymore. I just don't. And I had
Especially for no money or for very little money.
Exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
sure, I'm passionate about it and I do love it. And it was always fun. It was never a hobby for me. Even when I was 8 years old, it was not a hobby. It was 100% serious. But I also know how hard it is to stay at the level I was in 1994. And I just don't want to work that hard anymore. So, it is what it is. I went down and I played the drums a bit and I thought, do I have the chops to actually audition for a band like Primus and not be embarrassed? Because I know I would have to put it online. You know what I mean? I would have to suffer the wrath of a whole bunch of people telling me how much I suck.
Wait, I had no idea they were auditioning drummers. Was this recent?
Yes, man. It's happening. I don't think they've picked anybody yet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so, I was thinking, in 94, I had all their stuff memorized, songs in 11, you name it, man. I was there. But I don't anymore. And my chops, when you don't sit down behind your kit for 18 months, you lose your fingers. You know what I mean?
For sure. Yeah, you got to get back in the groove. You got to get back with the feel. You got to get back with the swing of it. And yeah, I know it's like, that's what it is, for every instrument, every, vocalists, guitarists, bass players, like everything. Like if you stop, for, more than a couple of days or even a week, or just, I think for most people, it's you have to get back into it. Just kind of like when you stop working out and you go back to the gym and it's like, oh God, and you got to get back in the flow of it. So.
Right. Yeah, totally. It's been humbling, but I have moved on. I mean, I'm doing voice work and, auditioning for companies all over the world and reading audiobooks. And so, I have found a place to be creative. I do miss the drumming. I would still take that any day of the year if I could get my chops back without having to go through 2 years of torture.
Yeah.
So, it is what it is. It's okay. I'm okay with it.
I think that's extremely common because everyone has people that have the dream of being in the music industry, being a famous musician, singer, etc. It's like, I think if you don't reach that goal soon enough, and then once you get older, and then you want to settle down and have a family, and then you have kids, and it starts hitting you like the reality of, okay, well, I can't really mess around with this anymore because I need to have steady money because I have other people that rely on me, and it completely changes everything. And I totally understand why most people make that decision to maybe not completely give it up, but like to put other priorities in front of that. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think
I mean, people can make fun of it, but I got married, I had kids. I have grandchildren now, for God's sake. You know what I mean? And it's just life. And, I made a choice to settle down and mellow out, and then got really mad at myself for making the choice to settle down and mellow out.
Yeah. Well, what was, maybe that what you just talked about is the answer to this question, but I'm curious, it's, the theme question of the podcast. What was the darkest period in your career, and what did you do to overcome it, if it's different?
Yeah, well, I have actually had a lot of dark periods. I will say this. I'll preface with this is, fortunately for me, I was never a drug or alcohol guy, so that was never an issue, but I was definitely a sex addict.
Okay.
And the music business frees you. It gives you this weird blind authority to do really dumb things to yourself and to others. It gives you an excuse, this sort of understanding that, well, that's part of the deal. That comes with the business.
Yeah.
And even though I did buy into it in the sense of, believing like I deserved unfettered sexual attention or something like that, the reality is, it wasn't hard to find somebody who was interested. When you're standing on a stage, and I'll say it, I'm not a great looking guy, but I'm a badass motherfucker on the drums. Or I was, and girls liked it. They were curious, whatever you want to say. So I feel like if you had a decent personality, you you could take advantage of people. And I wasn't trying to harm anyone, but I was definitely taking advantage of what was available to me.
I hear you.
And note to the listeners, I've never cheated on my wife. I love my wife immensely, but that's also why I left the business, because I knew if I stayed, I would make a mistake. And that was a huge, that was actually the main reason, Alex. I don't know why I didn't mention it before, but I was afraid of my own inability to say no.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. Thanks for sharing that as well. I mean, I can relate, I went through, a phase in my 20s. I think, most people in the industry, or just most people in general, you go through your phase in your 20s, just kind of sleeping around and being ridiculous. So I definitely can relate to that. There's things like, I wish I wouldn't, there's things I've done that I regret, but I think a lot of, most people need to go through that and to realize, okay, what kind of relationships do I want to have? Where do my morals really lie? And I know for you, deciding to get married and have a family, like, that's great. Like, as I get older, I yearn for that. And, I'm glad I went through that kind of debaucherous phase, because it's out of my system. And now I know, like, exactly who I am and what I want, and, where my morals are, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And can I actually continue a thought on this?
Yeah.
I did something this year at the beginning of the year that I've never done. I actually went to a sex anonymous meeting, and not because I was doing anything, but because you brought up this idea of darkness a second ago. I went through a state of deep depression from 2018 until about 6 months ago, and I'm telling you, man, I could not figure it out. And I will tell you, I still don't know what it was. I could blame it on things. I could say it was a spiritual darkness, or I could say it was, something from my past, or, what I mean? I was abused, which I wasn't, by the way. My parents were fantastic. But I went through a really bad phase. And at the beginning of this year, a good friend of mine, who had some friends who had gone through something similar, had suggested to me that maybe I had a sex addiction issue. And I'm like, where does this come from? Like, I've never said said it out loud to him. And he said, well, there's some medical proof. I don't know if this is true, but there's some proof that basically says that sex addicts are known for significant bouts of depression because of the identity, the way that they self-identify, that they see themselves as, in a sense, subconsciously being out of control, that they can't manage their feelings in a normal way, and that embarrassment, that shame, causes them to fall into deep depression. And so I went to an SA meeting to see if maybe there would be a breakthrough for me, that I would, seeing all these other people talking might help me understand who I am, etc. And what it told me was, I don't need to be in an SA meeting, that wasn't the issue. For me, it was actually financial.
Okay.
It was, I went through a big financial crush back in 2009, and I never really fully recovered from it. And I've carried the embarrassment of that for over a decade.
Wow. Yeah, man. There's a lot there, a lot to unpack there. But yeah, I think the fact that you decided to give the SA meeting a try, that's first of all, it's super brave of you to do that, because it's, everyone kind of, we have these feelings like maybe I am a sex addict, or maybe I am an alcoholic, and we're kind of ashamed and a little bit afraid maybe to take that first step to go to a meeting or whatever. Yeah. But the fact that you did and you realize, okay, I'm good. That's that's step in the right direction. And I think finances too are obviously like a huge factor in people experiencing depression, especially in our modern economy, and in the United States. It's like, especially in the bigger cities. So yeah, I totally I can relate with you there, because unfortunately I feel that a lot of people, especially in this industry, where it gives the idea that, like, if you're not making a certain amount of money, then you're a loser, or you're failing, or blah blah blah. And it's really sad, but it's sometimes I think people they're too in their head about that, about finances, and it really, really brings them down. And I've even been through that, multiple times where, I felt like less than because, I'm a certain age, I should be making a certain amount. And so I must be failing and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I can totally relate to that,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. I mean, I live, here's the thing that kind of freaks people out. They don't understand is, if you go on the news, everything in the world tells you the expensive places to live in the United States are. It's San Francisco, it's Seattle, it's New York. You know what I mean? You
Yeah.
just know certain areas are crazy expensive. LA's very expensive. You know this. And I live in one of those four places. I live just outside of the city of Seattle, and the cost of living here is monumentally high. And so even though my wife and I make a decent living, we barely get by. And it has really humbled me because as a husband, as a father, I mean, I'm 58 years old. I grew up in an era where men were the breadwinners and women were they were housewives, they were homemakers, and that was the expectation.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I subscribe to those old sort of sociological philosophies, but I do want to be a provider. I want to be the provider, and I'm not. And that is incredibly difficult to deal with, especially after you've made the choices yourself to sort of upset the balance. I'm the reason my life is the way it is. I chose to sell my insurance company. I chose to make a change, and it was a very poor financial decision. It was a great mental decision, but it hasn't helped me feel better about myself if there's anything to say about it. So
I understand what you're saying. Yeah. And, I think that's a whole nother rabbit hole of a discussion too, like the whole like traditional, the nuclear family, as they call it, with the feminine and female and feminine and masculine roles and the tradition of that. And, I think it just depends on the family and on the people. And, and I totally resonate with you there, feeling like, I think as most men, we feel like we by default just want to be the provider. And as the economy gets more and more ridiculous and cost of living goes up and inflation, things become more and more challenging. So every year, even though maybe you just finally have started to get ahead, like then the bar raises again, and then again. So it's like we're constantly just chasing our tail. And yeah, man, I resonate with that. And, I think too, I don't think you should, I mean, I know it's hard to say that, but I know most people struggle with, I want to be the provider or the breadwinner. But, I think in America, unless you're in the top 1% of earners, I think most households are, the man and the woman, they're sharing expenses to some degree. It's not just like the man's paying for everything all the time, no matter what. That's pretty rare. Yeah. So, and I even know, dude, I know if your wife came to you and said like, I don't want to work, that you would figure something out. I think most men would just like take care of it. And yeah, it's like we'd have to make sacrifices and yeah, and you have kids, and it's like the more kids you have, the more expensive it is and the more you have to make. So I totally understand, man. I totally understand how you going through those emotions,
Yeah, and it doesn't help when the front end of your car falls off right before Christmas. But and that happened last year too. It happened to my last car last year on Christmas Eve on the interstate, and then it happened today, 1 block from the interstate. For real, in a different car. Yeah. So God hates me apparently.
Well, Rob, man, anything you'd like to share before we wrap it up? Where can people find you on social media and check out your podcast?
Yeah. Well, okay. So my show is called Sentimental Illness. It was Rockstar Superhero, and people ask me all the time why I changed it. And I will tell you simply, I really wanted to take my focus because I like metal music. I tend to like darker styles of music, darker themes. I found that the artists I was talking to were open to talking about their struggles, specifically in the, as mental crisis, etc., was happening in their world. And so that led me to make a change to the show and thematically turn it more towards the struggles people deal with, which has had it, which has helped it increase its audience, but it's also changed the audience. So
Yeah.
it is what it is, but you can find me anywhere online. If you type Sentimental Illness, the podcast, it'll come up on all 1,000 different locations you get your podcasts. But I'm also on YouTube under This is Sentimental Illness. I'm on Instagram and Facebook and Threads and Twitter, and it's all This is Sentimental Illness. So those words are uncommon online, so it's not hard to find me. And my full name's Rob Leland. So I would love to hear from you guys. If you have a band or you want to feature your band or you want to chat with me about dark stuff, I'm your guy.
Perfect. We'll put a link in the notes so everyone can check out your show and contact you if they'd like. So, man, thank you so much for taking the time. It's great to talk to you again. I really enjoyed being on your podcast a while back, and I'm glad you're doing well. I'm glad everything is going good. And yeah, man, just keep moving, keep doing what you're doing, and I'm glad I got to talk to you today. So I appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks to you, Alex. I appreciate you too. I think what you do is amazing. You're super talented. You're very inspiring, and you're a hell of a nice guy. So thanks, and happy holidays to everybody.
You too, man. Happy holidays. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Cheers.